My great pleasure to welcome in Greg Wrubell, the voice of the Cougars on the Deseret First Credit Union hotline via Zoom now to discuss maybe a little bit of that voiceover with Greg and Shep, and specifically his optimism for a potential college football season based on what Joel Klatt of Fox Sports said. Greg, are you feeling optimistic like Joel Klatt that college football is going to happen in 2020?
Yeah, I think we're going to play one way or the other. It's going to happen.
And who knows? Are there fans in the stands? Is it limited? Would you be okay if it's some truncated version, or do you just want it in any form, or are you willing to wait to push it later or even the spring if we had to?
Yeah, I'd rather not push it and wait. And I realize that it wouldn't be ideal to have, collegiate sports being played in venues with a percentage of available seats allocated for spectators. That wouldn't be great, but not much about 2020 is going to be ideal, right? And so if we get to that point and there's a great number of fans in the stands, that'd be wonderful. But I think just to have the sport back in whatever way with somebody in attendance, sports was not designed to be an antiseptic experience. It wasn't designed to be a made-for-TV competition with no rooting interest in the venue. That's just not what it's ever been about. And so to do it that way, again, is not the best-case scenario. It's maybe the best thing we can do for the time being, but it's not what anybody really wants. And the closer we can get to the real thing, the better. And the real question is, what timetable allows us to do that?
Yeah, we obviously don't know how many people will be watching BYU football or any college football team for that matter in person, but we did talk with Dennis Pitta recently about Zach Wilson and working with John Beck, and obviously John Beck feels very good about Zach Wilson and what he is doing as he progresses as a quarterback at BYU. What do you expect of Zach Wilson, regardless of how many fans he's playing in front of when he starts his junior season?
Well, I expect a guy that would look like we thought he would look, like if healthy. I mean, and really last year we didn't really see, that guy. It was a race and a rush to get him just ready for the season, and he didn't have the prep that any quarterback would want to get ready. And just getting him physically to a point to throw was the objective. And as we found out after the season, even up to the first week of the season, coaches had questions whether he'd be ready to go in that season opener. And I don't think you could say he looked, full go or 100%. He might even say the same thing. And then once he had the second injury, well, then, all bets were off. So while it wasn't entirely a lost season, it wasn't Zach Wilson, at his true capacity or true potential in 2019. So just a healthy Zach Wilson should make a ton of difference. But beyond that, I expect a robust competition to make sure that Zach is pushed by good talent, not just guys to say they're in the mix, but guys that can play, because we've already seen them play.
And that's what's interesting. I don't know that there's been a situation like this in BYU history where you go, does BYU have three capable guys on the roster of starting? Like Baylor Romney beats a top 15 team, right, in the rain. It was crazy. And Jaron Hall's athleticism was on display in a couple of starts, I guess 1.5 games there. So for Zach Wilson, I was thinking this, Greg, when we look at all the really good BYU to great BYU quarterbacks, they had their upperclassmen years to really prove themselves. We have yet to see that with Zach Wilson up to this point.
And we've also yet to see the kind of continuity that makes a great quarterback. Since the years of John Beck and Max Hall, it's been a rotating cast of characters essentially every season. Taysom Hill had that 1 year, the 1 year where he had a complete year. But for the most part, quarterback position has been snake bit for the better part of a decade we're talking about right now. And again, though, those Beck and Hall years where you knew who your guy was going to be every game, barring injury, which actually didn't ever happen. John Beck missed one game due to a sprained ankle, and that's it over 6 or 7 seasons of play. And since then, it just hasn't been the case. And so, the rhythm of preparing upperclassmen to have their years to shine and the continuity that comes with health have just not been there for BYU in a long time.
Let's talk about the offensive line and those guys protecting Zach Wilson, because both James Empey and Brady Christensen are receiving some nice off-season or Corona off-season honors from Pro Football Focus. What do you expect of the offensive line? Are you buying the hype that these guys are going to go next level and that just maybe in a year or two we could have multiple offensive linemen drafted into the NFL?
Yeah, I just broke it down on Twitter, guys. It's been 15 years since a BYU offensive lineman was drafted, as you guys know. And that capped a period where, there were always linemen going, for about 20 years preceding 2005. It was rare that you'd go a couple seasons without a BYU offensive lineman being drafted. Now you go 15 years without a single lineman getting picked by the NFL. Clearly there's a core. It's the engine room of any team, and it's interesting to consider that since Bronco Mendenhall came on board as head coach, from that time until now, as good as some offenses have been for BYU, no NFL draftees in that bunch over a period of 15 years. It's quite remarkable considering BYU's tradition up to that time. So, yeah, now's the time, right? Let's get back into that game. And the belief is, our belief is, by watching them play and seeing those who grade these things with some level of proficiency, that BYU has talent that you could presume could be developed into, NFL draftable talent. And wouldn't that be great? Because again, it is what makes the offense go, and it's been a long time for BYU to have that kind of success up front.
Eamon Brennan of The Athletic, shifting gears, talked about BYU basketball in a mailbag, saying they could become a mid-major powerhouse. So we talked in the earlier segment about what that could look like, what that means. So do you feel like, and it's only been 1 year, but do you feel like BYU is trending towards that distinction of being a mid-major powerhouse?
Well, just the fact that Mark Pope and BYU are in the conversation with so many high-profile transfers right now who are keeping BYU in their mix is an indicator of just how wide, BYU's talent net may be cast these days, and that's a positive. Well, let's not overlook the fact that in the Dave Rose era, BYU was producing. I mean, producing 20, 25 wins a year, getting into the NCAA tournament more often than not, many, many years in a row, getting in. So they weren't that far away, and BYU's still not far away from being considered, that kind of college basketball, just below the Blue Bloods, right, in terms of names you recognize. We all know that BYU's never been to a Final Four, but they do have the most tournament appearances without getting to the Final Four. They're in the mix and have been for a long, long time. Putting yourself in Gonzaga territory would, I think, be putting yourself in true powerhouse territory. And Gonzaga is the team that is seemingly these days a perennial number one pick at some point in the season. Well, BYU's not there. And that's maybe the bar, Gonzaga being the bar. But BYU's not, that terribly far away from being just, on that level you talk about after the P5s, who are the big names in college basketball. And you find all those Big East teams and teams like Gonzaga. And BYU, again, does get mentioned a lot. And I think what Mark Pope is doing right now is just upping BYU's profile because of all, the transfers who are considering BYU right now.
Greg Wrubell, the voice of the Cougars, with us on BYU Sports Nation. Where has Mark Pope made the biggest difference? Maybe it is in the transfer portal, but where do you think he has made the biggest difference in impacting this BYU program?
Well, I think you can see from his days at UVU through to BYU, his style of play was identifying, the ways to be the most efficient offense possible. And a lot of that dealt with three-point shooting. And BYU's jump from around 250th in the country to first in the country showed where Mark Pope thought BYU could develop quickly, with the most efficiency. And bringing, players like Jake Toulson in was a big part of it, but it was also stylistic. And there have been others observing the game who've broken down, just how Mark Pope runs and calls an offense. And it's free flowing, but it's regimented. And there's that belief that when BYU needs a play, needs a bucket, there's enough to go. There's a lot to go to make good things happen. And so I don't think that BYU fans should worry about this being a one-hit wonder, flash in the pan season where this group of special seniors made something happen that can't be replicated. I think it can be replicated and differently because BYU's roster in a 2020-21 is going to look a lot different. It's going to be a lot taller. It's going to have a lot more versatility, particularly on the backcourt with the height BYU has. And so I'm just fascinated and intrigued to see what year two of Mark Pope's offense is going to look like. They're not going to abandon the three-point shot by any stretch, but they may not be number one in the country again, and yet still be a very, very good and very efficient offense. Mark Pope's UVU numbers through his BYU season just showed an uptick year by year by year in offensive efficiency and in three-point proficiency, not coincidentally.
Maybe it's just and once. That's the 3-point play that BYU gets. It's just the bigs laying it in and getting fouled and making a free throw. Let's finish with this, Greg. Yesterday was the 25th anniversary of the passing of Kresimir Ćosić. Now, he had a 3-year career at BYU. Was here 4 years. Freshman couldn't play, but his influence on the game is unbelievable. We're going to talk about later in the show a little bit more too, but what are your recollections of kind of Kresimir Ćosić, what you've heard, what you've read, and the impact he had on BYU and the game of basketball?
Well, everything you hear is that, but before, the wave of internationals had come to the game, he was, the forerunner, one of the true front runners in that respect. And credit to BYU for being forward thinking that way. And that, while he wasn't, Pete Maravich, he had the Pistol Pete flair. And for a guy of his size, how unique and remarkable it was for those who watched him to say if he could do things that nobody that size should normally be allowed to do. And, you think about players like Kresimir and others of his ilk. And if his game had existed in a social media age, just what kind of a phenom he might have been. And again, the numbers he put up, he did so without that one extra year of eligibility. So that's also something to consider, just what he might have done at BYU had he had played, another season longer. But it's nice to hear those who did get to see him play, to truly bring home exactly how just different and one of a kind his game was, for BYU basketball at that time. It would have been fun to see him play in person. Of course, never happened. But we know enough to know how special he truly was. And guys, if I could just leave you with one thing today, I have done a lot of driving in this state over 30 plus years, and did some out of state driving this past holiday weekend. And if you want an indication of just how much things are hoping or trying to get back to normal, you had to just be on the roads this past weekend. It was as crowded an I-15 as I've seen in my days here in this state. There are a lot of folks wanting to get back to life as close to normal as possible. And there will be rules and restrictions kind of guiding us there. But truly the hunger is there, and we're making the right steps and making the right paces. And think about it, guys. We're still 3 months away from needing to play college football or getting close to that point. And 3 months is a long time. Think about 3 months ago. That was February 26th. And BYU just beaten Gonzaga, getting ready to go to Pepperdine. There was nary a thought to any of what has transpired. And think of what has transpired in 3 months. A lot can happen in 3 months. And we've still got 3 months to go. Hopefully, a lot of great things will happen, just as a lot of tough things happened in this past 3 months. A lot can happen, and hopefully it paces the right way to let us get back to what we all, hope is our life in the fall and winter.
I never thought I'd want to see Mario Kart on I-15 around Lehigh again, but here we are, Greg. Here we are.
It was a wild and busy weekend. A lot of folks out there, and again, hopefully it's just a sign of where we'll end up.
Greg, well said, and we're in it together. We hope on. Always nice to talk with you. Thanks so much.
Great to be with you guys. Thanks.
The voice of the Cougars, Greg Wrubell, on the Deseret First Credit Union Hotline. Deseret First, you know why, we show how.
Coming up.